Now, although there's so much value, right? Every conversation, although I'm very, very convinced about podcasts, every conversation we have, where we deep dive into it, I feel even more pumped with the concept and the value that it brings. Having said this, Swapnil, we still see there's some hesitancy by clients when it comes to actually saying, all right, let's get started with podcasts, right? So do you think there are certain misconceptions that actually hold clients back?
Yeah, I think again, in our experience so far, I think the hesitancy in a lot of cases is because customers have tried doing this and have failed at it earlier, right? The second reason is because, they think it's too large a project to take up, which it is. And thirdly, they're like, okay, how much is it going to cost? This seems like a very expensive affair, right? So the hesitancy is for the right reason. So let's try to break them down, right? And let's see reason number one, right? So reason number one, like I said, for clients being hesitant is because they've tried this before and it's not worked for them. And every time we interact with a customer or a client and they tell us that, hey, no, podcasts don't work. We've tried them earlier. My first question to them is, sure, you tried them earlier. You tried to do them in-house, right? And they'd be like, yeah. I'm like, of course it's going to fail if you try to do it in-house, right? Because you're not a podcast specialist in any way, right? That's not the business that you're in. That's the business we are in, right? So if you're going to try to do it in-house, it is going to fail, right? Because putting it together requires a lot of expertise in different areas. And if you think that you can just do it with one or two marketing people, just to tell you one bit of why it's difficult, just getting guests on your podcast requires literally a sales job. Emails to be sent, messages to be sent, multiple follow-ups to be done exactly like a salesperson would. Then there are scheduling issues that happen, and then finally you get someone on the podcast, right? Now that requires somebody to literally be doing this full time, non-stop, all the time. And companies can't devote one resource from their marketing team just to do that, right? So the reason why they're hesitant is because they've tried doing something like this, it's failed, and then they're like, oh, this doesn't work. And then when we go in and tell them, of course it failed, right? Because you tried to do it in-house versus outsourcing it. That's when it makes more sense to them, right? The second reason why it fails very often is because they try going to production companies, right? They think that is the answer. And they say, no, I did outsource this. I'm like, who did you outsource it to, right? And they're like, I outsourced this to a production company, and therefore it was too much of an effort for me. Yeah, because the production company doesn't really understand podcasts, right? They make an ad, they'll make a podcast. Tomorrow, if they have to make a documentary, they'd probably make that. They have no real specialization in the areas of podcasts because they don't really understand how the podcast that you make really connects to the customer's business and in turn the business growth, right? This entire angle of saying this is a way of accessing and engaging your customers is something that a production company in most cases don't end up understanding, right?
Yes.
So that's why there's a lot
I'm
of...
jumping in here, Swapnil. And, we've had enough conversations by now to say this with great amount of confidence, right? This aspect of saying getting in touch with key stakeholders, accessing, engaging, you don't hear that from production houses. And we've had those conversations.
Yes, absolutely. And Rosh, the other thing is that, you've seen that most, and there's a stat around this, right? So most podcasts don't go beyond their third or seventh episode, right? And of course they don't go beyond it. And none of the results that you're going to get from a podcast are going to come if you just do 3 episodes, right? And you look for some kind of an ROI on those particular 3 episodes. No, that's not the way it's going to work, right? You need to do a podcast in a very sustained manner for it to start delivering results for you. And just by the way, the results actually in a lot of cases are delivered from day one itself, because if you think of a podcast from the point of view of giving you access and engagement to your key customers, you're getting the result from day one, right? But again, because you're doing a recording and trying to put it online, a lot of companies think that, how many people don't talk the language of downloads anymore, but how many listeners did I get, right? Or how many views did I get, or how much of engagement did I get on that? That's the lens that they use, and then they say, it just such few views or engagement, so it doesn't work, right? And that's absolutely not the way to think about it. Right now, let me share another thing which is very interesting. Right, so one of the big fours, if I'm not mistaken, it's EY in the US, or Deloitte. One of these two, I can't recollect. Right, they run 30 different podcast series, right, or categories. They have 30 different ones, and they have over 700 episodes that they've done over the years, right? Why? Because they are broken up into different verticals at the big four, and each one of the verticals in a way has their own podcast series, right, of sort, that all
Right.
culminates into a larger podcast, of course. But they have so much of thought leadership, that they're building with this. And by the way, of all the companies that do thought leadership the best are the big four and the big consultings like the McKinseys and the BCGs of the world, right? And they have been doing podcasts for a very long time, very consistently, right? So we don't need to sell this to companies that are evolved in both the B2B space and the thought leadership space, and they really understand this, right?
Right.
So coming back, the big four, they have probably a lot of different verticals. Each vertical has their own podcast series, ties into an overall thing close to 700 episodes. Now, each one of those episodes, Rosh, they're on YouTube. On YouTube, they've got 100 views, 200 views, right? So if you look at it from the lens of how many views has it got, no, it's got very, very limited views, because it's a very niche topic. It's a very niche subject that they're discussing, right? It's not a mass subject that they're discussing. And in that particular niche, that they're discussing, they've got probably the 100 or 200 most relevant people going and watching it, right? So that's the reason people that really understand the business of thought leadership very well, building their brand really well, for them it's a no-brainer. They've been doing it for a long time. They know how to look at the ROI on that particular issue, right? Now, let me share another thing which is very important from both a B2B and a B2C business, right? So today, when most customers, especially if you're a relatively new company, when most customers or clients need to make a purchasing decision, they will often go on your website and check your website out, and they will go on your social media and check your social media out, right? That's one of the key aspects of purchasing. When you're making a purchasing decision, that's what you do. And you think about yourself as a consumer, Rosh, right? Tomorrow, if you want to buy a new suitcase, for example, and it's a new brand that you come across, you will definitely check their website and
I
social
did it a couple of times yesterday.
Yeah,
like
of
just
course.
yesterday, right?
It's just natural consumer behavior, and it's a way of really, online, especially checking out their shop in some way. Like, do you have your act together? And when you go to a company's social media and you see that page well maintained with interesting content on it, it builds a lot of trust. And that's the whole point that we talk about, right? And especially if they have a podcast, they have people talking, right, having discussions on that subject. You're like, yeah, I can see the humans behind this brand, right? So trust develops in terms of actually making a purchasing decision, right? So now it's very difficult for you to calculate the ROI of such things, right? Because it may seem like the amount of views or engagement that your podcast is getting online is very limited. But it is still very, very important from a purchasing decision point of view, and from building thought leadership point of view. So that's how I would look at it, right? So just going back a little, because I think we've gone a little all over the place, because there's so many interesting things to talk about when it comes to this question, right? So which is to say, why are companies hesitant to do it? Because number one, they've tried and failed, because they've tried in the wrong way. Number two, they're often hesitant because they think it's too big a project. And of course, it is a big project, and that's why you need to outsource it to a specialist like us, right, who really can take it off your head and execute it for it, so you can concentrate on actually your product, and you can concentrate on your business, and you can concentrate on being more strategic in terms of your overall marketing mix and the activities that you're doing under it, and not necessarily executing on a podcast, which as it is very difficult for you to do. So it is a big project, and that's why you need to outsource it. In terms of it being expensive, yes, it could end up being very expensive if, again, you don't think of it properly, right? If you think that you're in the business of podcasting and you need to have a swanky studio, right, and stuff like that, of course, it's going to be expensive, and that's not required, right? So, in a lot of cases, what we recommend to our clients is go virtual only, or at best go hybrid, right? And what hybrid means is that you do majority of your stuff virtually, and a few episodes you can do in person, right? That kind of a mix is what we recommend. Why? Because every time we're talking to a customer, we cannot think short term about
Right.
stuff, because in the short term you're not going to get the big benefits from this, right? You may get the small benefits of accessing and engaging the customer, them sharing it as evangelists, so on and so forth, but as the property ends up building, right, that's when you're really going to have fun with this and say,
Yeah.
man, this was so worth it's worth the money that we paid, and so worth the time that we spent on actually creating this thing, right? So the entire thing needs to be well thought through, and if it's not well thought through, it's going to fail.
Yeah.
Right? And Rosh, this is not just true of a podcast, for example, right?
Correct.
Tomorrow, if you're running a TV campaign, right, if it's not going to be well thought through, you're going to spend a lot of money on it, and the TV campaign is not going to work. Tomorrow, if you're doing performance marketing, hey,
Right.
you better talk to the experts. If you're going to,
Yes.
if you're going to spend so much of money on performance marketing, you want the returns on it, right? Please talk to the experts, and of course, we're not the experts there, but please identify who the experts is in that particular area, and talk to them about it, right? But if you just do stuff in a way which is not thought through, you don't get the results, and that's what we've seen happening to a lot of our clients, right? Now,
Yep.
in spite of that, it's so interesting, Rosh. I have to share this as well, right? Even though a lot of the customers that we speak to have had failed podcast endeavors in the past, they still recognize the importance of it as a tool, as a part of their marketing mix. And
Right.
that's why almost each one of them is engaging with us in some way or the other, right? Because they're like,
Right.
yeah, we failed, but we know this is too important for us not to try again.
They see the value
right?
in it.
They see the value in it in some way, right? So it's too important for us not to try again. So, like, almost every customer that we speak to will always talk about the fact it failed, but we still want to do it because we understand that
Yeah.
there's something that needs to be done, which is very, very encouraging, right?
Yeah.
To see. And I also think it's because people are seeing their own increased consumption of podcasts, right? And when they
Yes.
see their own increased consumption of podcasts as a way of learning and in some ways getting entertained, they realize that a lot of other people, it would be their way of learning as well, right?
Yeah.
So when you actually experience something firsthand is when when you're an evangelist of it in some
Yeah.
way, right? When you
And
kind of talk about
you
it.
also want to voice your brand in that manner. You're almost
Yeah.
inspired, saying that,
Yeah.
what, this is the quality content that's out there. This
Yeah,
is everything this content can do.
Absolutely.
You almost feel compelled to say, I want my
Yeah.
brand to be doing this
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.